The contract had been signed before she could even read. Lady Rosalind Ashford's future was bound in ink and wax, sealed by her father's hand and the ambitions of two ancient families. She had been raised to accept this truth as immutable as the changing seasons. Yet on a summer night in 1815, beneath a silver moon that witnessed secrets the daylight would never know, a single forbidden kiss would shatter every certainty she had ever possessed. What she believed was duty would reveal itself as a gilded prison, and the man she thought she knew would prove to be a stranger wearing a familiar face. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Manor with the pale, hesitant quality peculiar to the English countryside in late spring. Lady Rosalind Ashford sat before her vanity, watching her lady's maid arrange her dark auburn hair into an elaborate coiffure befitting her station. At 20 years of age, Rosalind possessed the kind of beauty that painters sought to capture: porcelain skin that flushed easily, eyes the color of moss after rain, and a delicate frame that belied the sharp intelligence behind her carefully composed expression. "You must sit still, my lady," Martha murmured, securing another pin with practiced efficiency. "Lord Pemberton will expect perfection this afternoon." At the mention of her betrothed, Rosalind's reflection betrayed nothing, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around the ivory handle of her hand mirror. Lord Edmund Pemberton. The name had been spoken in her presence since she was 7 years old, always with reverence, always with the certainty of fate. The Pembertons were one of the most powerful families in England, their lineage stretching back to the Norman conquest. Their wealth derived from vast estates across 3 counties and shrewd investments in the burgeoning industrial enterprises that were transforming the nation. The marriage contract between the Ashfords and the Pembertons had been negotiated when Rosalind was still in leading strings. Her father, the Earl of Ashford, had seen in the alliance an opportunity to restore his family's waning influence and secure their financial future. The Pembertons, for their part, desired the Ashford name, ancient, respected, and untainted by the commercial ventures that had built their fortune. It was, by all accounts, a perfect arrangement. Rosalind had been raised with this knowledge as her constant companion. Her education had been designed to prepare her for the role of Lady Pemberton. She spoke French and Italian fluently, played the pianoforte with accomplished skill, understood the intricacies of managing a great household, and had been schooled in the art of conversation that entertained without challenging, that charmed without revealing too much of the mind behind it. She had met Lord Pemberton on numerous occasions throughout her childhood and adolescence, at balls, at dinners, during carefully chaperoned walks through manicured gardens. He was handsome in the classical sense, with fair hair that gleamed like wheat in summer, blue eyes that seemed to assess everything they encountered, and a bearing that spoke of absolute confidence in his place in the world. He was always correct in his behavior toward her, always appropriately attentive, and always, she sensed, slightly distant, as though she were a valuable acquisition he had already secured and need not concern himself with overmuch. "There," Martha said with satisfaction, stepping back to admire her work. "Beautiful as a portrait, my lady." Rosalind studied her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was indeed beautiful, perfectly groomed, impeccably dressed in a morning gown of pale green muslin that complemented her coloring. But there was something in her eyes, a question, perhaps, or a longing she could not quite name, that no amount of careful presentation could disguise. She dismissed Martha and descended the grand staircase to the breakfast room, where her father was already seated, reading the morning papers with the absorbed attention he gave to matters of politics and finance. The Earl of Ashford was a man in his late 50s, his once dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, his face marked by the lines of a life spent navigating the treacherous waters of aristocratic society. "Good morning, father," Rosalind said, taking her seat and accepting a cup of tea from the footman. "Rosalind," he acknowledged, lowering his paper, "I trust you are prepared for this afternoon. Lord Pemberton and his family will arrive at 3 o'clock. The final arrangements for the wedding must be settled." "Of course, Father." He studied her for a moment, and she wondered if he could see the turmoil she worked so hard to conceal, but if he did, he gave no sign. "You understand the importance of this union, I trust. The Pemberton alliance will secure our family's position for generations to come. Your mother would have been proud." The mention of her mother, who had died when Rosalind was 12, sent a familiar ache through her chest. She remembered her mother as a gentle presence, always kind, always proper, but there had been moments, rare, precious moments, when Rosalind had glimpsed something else in her eyes. A sadness, perhaps, a resignation. She had never understood it then. Now, she wondered if her mother had once stood where she stood, facing a future chosen by others, accepting it because that was what daughters of great families did. "I understand, Father," she said quietly. The morning passed in a blur of preparations. The house was cleaned to perfection, flowers arranged in every room, the finest china and silver laid out for tea. Rosalind changed into an afternoon dress of ivory silk, her hair redressed, her appearance scrutinized and approved by her father's critical eye. When the Pemberton carriage arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, Rosalind was waiting in the drawing room, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. Lord Edmund Pemberton entered first, followed by his parents, the Duke and Duchess of Pemberton, and his younger sister, Lady Charlotte, a pretty blonde girl of 18, with a calculating look that Rosalind had never quite trusted. "Lady Rosalind," Edmund said, bowing over her hand. His touch was cool, impersonal. "You look well." "Thank you, my lord. I hope your journey was pleasant." "Tolerable," he replied, already turning his attention to her father. The afternoon proceeded with the mechanical precision of a well-rehearsed performance. They discussed the wedding, which was to take place in 6 weeks at St. George's, Hanover Square. They reviewed the settlements, the properties that would be joined, the arrangements for Rosalind's future household. She sat quietly, contributing when addressed, aware that her opinions on these matters were neither sought nor particularly relevant. The decisions had been made long ago. It was Lady Charlotte who suggested a walk in the gardens. "The weather is so fine," she said with a bright smile, "and I'm sure Lord Pemberton and Lady Rosalind would appreciate a moment of privacy." Rosalind's father nodded his approval, and she found herself walking beside Edmund along the gravel paths that wound through the Ashford Gardens. The roses were in bloom, their scent heavy in the warm air. For several minutes they walked in silence. "You seem pensive," Edmund observed, though his tone suggested mild curiosity rather than genuine concern. "I was merely thinking about the wedding," Rosalind replied carefully. "It is a significant occasion. Indeed, the union of our families will be celebrated throughout society. You will, of course, be expected to maintain the standards befitting the Pemberton name. My mother will instruct you in the management of our households and the social obligations you will assume. I am prepared to fulfill my duties, my lord." He glanced at her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes, assessment perhaps, or satisfaction. "I have no doubt you will be an adequate wife, Lady Rosalind. You have been properly trained for the role." Adequate. The word settled over her like a cold mist. She had been raised to be adequate, to fulfill a role, to meet expectations. But what of her own desires, her own dreams? Did they matter at all? As if sensing her thoughts, Edmund continued, "I trust you understand that ours is a practical arrangement. Affection may develop in time, but it is not the foundation of our union. Duty, family, and mutual respect, these are what matter." "I understand, my lord," she said, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. They returned to the house, where the final details were concluded. As the Pembertons prepared to depart, Edmund took her hand once more. "I shall see you at the Haverford ball next week," he said. "It will be an excellent opportunity to be seen together before the wedding." After they left, Rosalind retreated to her room, pleading a headache. She stood at her window, looking out over the gardens where she had walked with Edmund, and felt the weight of her future pressing down upon her like a physical force. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks she would become Lady Pemberton, and her life as Rosalind Ashford would effectively end. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of the stories she had read as a girl. Tales of adventure and romance, of women who chose their own paths, who loved freely and lived boldly. She had always known such stories were fantasies, pleasant diversions from reality, but nothing more. Yet tonight, the contrast between those imagined lives and her own carefully circumscribed existence felt unbearably sharp. She climbed into bed and extinguished her candle, but sleep eluded her. In the darkness, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been suppressing for months, perhaps years. She did not love Edmund Pemberton. She did not even particularly like him. And the thought of spending the rest of her life as his adequate wife filled her with a despair so profound it threatened to overwhelm her. But what choice did she have? The contract was signed. The arrangements were made. Her father's hopes, her family's future, all rested on this marriage. To refuse now would be to bring shame and ruin upon everyone she loved. So she would do her duty. She would walk down the aisle of St. George's in 6 weeks, speak her vows, and become the woman everyone expected her to be. Yet as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, a small, rebellious voice whispered in the depths of her heart, "Is this truly all there is? Is there no other way?" The answer, she feared, was one she already knew. But fate, it seemed, had other plans, plans that would begin to unfold at the Haverford ball beneath a moonlit sky, with a kiss that would change everything. The Haverford ball was the most anticipated event of the London season. Lord and Lady Haverford's Mayfair mansion blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their ballroom a glittering spectacle of crystal chandeliers, gilt mirrors, and hothouse flowers arranged in magnificent profusion. The cream of English society had gathered to see and be seen, to dance and gossip, and though few would admit it openly, to witness the public debut of Lord Pemberton and Lady Rosalind Ashford as an officially betrothed couple. Rosalind arrived with her father, her gown a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, pearls woven through her elaborately dressed hair. She knew she looked beautiful. The admiring glances that followed her entrance confirmed it. But beneath the composed exterior, her stomach churned with an anxiety she could not quite explain. Edmund was already present, standing near the refreshment table with a group of gentlemen. When he saw her, he excused himself and approached with the measured stride of a man who knew every eye in the room was upon him. "Lady Rosalind," he said, bowing formally, "you are exquisite this evening." "Thank you, my lord." She curtsied, aware of the whispers rippling through the crowd, the knowing smiles, the nods of approval. This was what society had been waiting for, the confirmation of an alliance that would unite two of England's most prominent families. Edmund led her onto the floor for the first waltz, his hand at her waist, correct and impersonal. They moved through the steps with practiced grace, and Rosalind found herself scanning the room, observing the other dancers, the clusters of conversation, anything to distract herself from the hollow feeling in her chest. "You seem distracted," Edmund remarked, his tone carrying a hint of displeasure. "Forgive me, my lord. I am merely overwhelmed by the occasion." "You must learn to manage such feelings. As Lady Pemberton, you will be the centre of attention at many such events. Composure is essential." "Of course, my lord." The waltz ended, and Edmund escorted her to where his family stood. The Duchess of Pemberton regarded her with cool appraisal, while Lady Charlotte offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Lady Rosalind," the Duchess said, "I trust you are prepared for the announcement this evening." Rosalind's heart skipped. "Announcement, Your Grace?" "Lord Pemberton will formally announce your engagement to the Assembly," the Duchess explained, as though speaking to a slow child. "It is customary, and it will cement your position in society as his future wife." Yes, of course, Your Grace. Edmund had already moved away, engaged in conversation with several influential lords. Rosalind stood with the Pemberton women, feeling increasingly like an ornament on display. Lady Charlotte chattered about the latest fashions, but Rosalind barely heard her attention drawn to Edmund, who seemed entirely in his element, commanding attention, his laughter carrying across the ballroom. The evening progressed through a succession of dances and polite conversations. Rosalind danced with several gentlemen of her father's acquaintance, always aware of Edmund's watchful gaze, always conscious of playing her role perfectly. It was during a brief respite, when she had retreated to a quieter corner of the ballroom to catch her breath, that everything began to unravel. She had stepped out onto one of the balconies overlooking the gardens, seeking a moment of solitude. The night air was warm and fragrant with the scent of jasmine. The moon hung full and luminous in the sky, casting silver light over the manicured lawns below. She closed her eyes, allowing herself this brief escape from the suffocating atmosphere inside. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice startled her. She turned to find a man she didn't recognize standing in the shadows of the balcony. He stepped forward into the moonlight, and she caught her breath. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead, and eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and something else. A warmth, perhaps, or a curiosity that was entirely different from the calculating gazes she was accustomed to. "Forgive me," he said, noting her surprise. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm Dr. James Thornfield. I'm here as a guest of Lord Haverford. We were at Cambridge together." "Dr. Thornfield," she acknowledged, relaxing slightly. There was something in his manner that put her at ease, a lack of pretension that was refreshing. "I am Lady Rosalind Ashford." "Ah," he said, and something flickered across his face. "Lord Pemberton's betrothed. I've heard much about you this evening." "Nothing too scandalous, I hope," she said, attempting lightness. He smiled, and it transformed his face entirely. "Quite the contrary. You are, I'm told, the perfect bride for a perfect lord." There was no mockery in his tone, but Rosalind felt the words like a weight. "Perfect," she repeated softly. "Yes, that is what is expected." He studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling sensation that he saw more than she intended to reveal. "And is that what you wish to be? Perfect?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her what she wished. "It is what I must be," she said finally. "Must and wish are not always the same thing." Before she could respond, they heard voices approaching. Dr. Thornfield stepped back into the shadows. "I should return inside. It was a pleasure to meet you, Lady Rosalind." He was gone before she could reply, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a strange sense of loss. She remained on the balcony for a few more minutes, composing herself before returning to the ballroom. What she found there would shatter her world. The crowd had gathered in the center of the ballroom, forming a circle around something or someone. Rosalind pushed through the throng, her heart beginning to pound with a dread she couldn't name. And then she saw them. Edmund stood in the center of the circle, his arm around Lady Charlotte. Not his sister, she realized with dawning horror, but her own cousin, Charlotte Ashford, who had arrived late to the ball. The two were locked in an embrace that was anything but familial, their lips pressed together in a kiss that spoke of passion and familiarity. The room had fallen silent, every eye fixed on the scandalous scene. Rosalind stood frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not like this. Edmund finally broke away from Charlotte, and his eyes met Rosalind's across the crowd. For a moment, she thought she saw something like regret in his expression. But then his face hardened into something cold and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "I apologize for this display. But I can no longer continue with a charade that has become unbearable." Rosalind felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her father appeared at her side, his face ashen. Edmund continued, his tone measured and deliberate. Lady Rosalind is a fine woman, perfectly adequate in every respect. But I have come to realize that adequacy is not enough. I require more than a well-trained wife who will manage my households and bear my heirs with appropriate decorum. I require passion. I require a woman who stirs my blood, who challenges me, who makes me feel alive. He pulled Charlotte closer. Miss Charlotte Ashford is that woman. We have been acquainted for some months now. I had hoped to suppress these feelings, to do my duty as expected. But tonight, I realize that I cannot. I will not marry without love, even if that love is deemed inappropriate by society's standards. The Duchess of Pemberton had gone pale, her fan fluttering frantically. Edmund, what are you saying? I am saying, Mother, that I am breaking my engagement to Lady Rosalind. The marriage contract, while legally binding, contains a clause that allows for dissolution in cases of mutual unsuitability. I invoke that clause now. Rosalind found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. Mutual unsuitability. You never expressed any concerns. Because you never asked, Edmund interrupted, his tone almost pitying. You were so focused on being perfect, on fulfilling your role, that you never once asked what I wanted, what I needed. Charlotte understands me in ways you never could. Charlotte, who had remained silent throughout, now spoke. I'm sorry, Rosalind, truly, but Edmund and I, we cannot deny what we feel. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Edmund humiliated her publicly, but he had done so with her own cousin, a girl she had known since childhood, whom she had trusted. The whispers began then, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Rosalind could hear the fragments of conversation, each one a dagger to her heart. Always knew she was too cold. Poor Pemberton, trapped with such a passionless creature. Charlotte is so much more vivacious. What a scandal. Her father gripped her arm. We must leave. Now. But Rosalind couldn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, staring at Edmund and Charlotte, at the wreckage of her future scattered at her feet. Everything she had been raised to be, everything she had prepared for, had been declared insufficient, inadequate, not enough. Edmund had the audacity to approach her. I hope you understand, Lady Rosalind. This is better for both of us. You deserve someone who can appreciate your qualities. I am simply not that man. She looked up at him, and in that moment, something inside her broke. Not her spirit. That would come later, but the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for so long. You are a coward, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. You speak of passion and love, but what you have done here tonight is neither passionate nor loving. It is cruel and calculated. You could have ended our engagement privately with dignity. Instead, you chose to humiliate me before all of society. That speaks not to your capacity for love, but to your capacity for cruelty. For a moment, Edmund looked taken aback, but then his expression hardened. Think what you will. The engagement is ended. Rosalind's father finally succeeded in pulling her away. They made their way through the crowd, every eye following them, every whisper like a physical blow. She held her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. But once they were in the carriage, once the door closed and they pulled away from the Haverford mansion, she finally allowed the tears to fall. Great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Her father sat beside her, his own face a mask of fury and despair. He will pay for this, her father said through clenched teeth. I will see to it that he pays. But Rosalind knew the truth. In society's eyes, she was the one who would pay. She was the one who had been found wanting, who had failed to hold her betrothed's interest. The scandal would follow her everywhere. She would be pitied, whispered about, forever marked as the woman who wasn't enough. As the carriage carried her through the dark London streets, Rosalind stared out at the moonlit city and felt her carefully ordered world collapse around her. Everything she had believed, everything she had been taught to value, had proven worthless in a single devastating moment. She had been raised to be perfect, and perfection, it seemed, was not enough. The question that haunted her as they returned to Ashford House was simple and terrible. If she could not be what they wanted her to be, then who was she, and what would become of her now? The days following the Haverford ball passed in a haze of humiliation and despair. Rosalind remained sequestered in her room at Ashford House, unable to face the world beyond her door. The scandal had spread through London society with the speed and veracity of a wildfire. The morning papers, while too discreet to name names directly, had published thinly veiled accounts of a shocking breach of engagement at a prominent ball that left no doubt as to the parties involved. Calling cards piled up in the entrance hall, some from genuine friends offering sympathy, others from the merely curious hoping to extract details for further gossip. Rosalind refused them all. She could not bear the pitying looks, the whispered condolences, the barely concealed satisfaction of those who had always envied her position and now revelled in her downfall. Her father had retreated into cold fury, consulting with solicitors about the legal ramifications of the broken contract. The Pembertons, it seemed, were prepared to pay a substantial sum to dissolve the agreement, money the Ashfords desperately needed, but which felt to Rosalind like payment for her humiliation. She was being compensated for her inadequacy, bought off like a merchant whose goods had been rejected. On the 5th day after the ball, a letter arrived that would change everything. It was from her mother's sister, Lady Agatha Hartwell, a woman Rosalind had met only a handful of times, but who had always fascinated her. Aunt Agatha was a widow who had never remarried after her husband's death 20 years prior. Instead, she had taken the unprecedented step of managing her own affairs, travelling extensively and establishing herself in Bath, where she presided over a salon frequented by writers, artists, and intellectuals, a far cry from the rigid social circles of London. The letter was characteristically direct. "My dearest Rosalind, I have heard of the disgraceful events at the Haverford ball. That pompous fool Pemberton has done you the greatest favour of your life, though you cannot see it yet. Come to me in Bath immediately. You need distance from London's poisonous gossip and time to discover who you are beyond the role you were trained to play. Your father will object, but remind him that I am your mother's sister and have every right to offer you refuge. Tell him also that my connections in Bath society are considerable, and that a period of quiet retirement with me will do more to restore your reputation than hiding in London like a wounded animal. Come, child, let me show you that there is life beyond the narrow confines of what you have known." Your affectionate aunt, Agatha Rosalind, read the letter 3 times, each reading kindling a small spark of hope in her chest. Bath, a new place, away from the whispers and the pitying glances. Away from the wreckage of her former life. Her father, as predicted, objected strenuously. Bath, with Agatha. The woman is practically a blue-stocking. She associates with poets and radicals. It's entirely unsuitable. More unsuitable than remaining in London as an object of ridicule, Rosalind countered, surprised by the strength in her own voice. It was the first time she had spoken with any force since the ball. "Aunt Agatha is right, father. I need to leave London, and her invitation provides a respectable reason for my departure." Her father's expression softened slightly. He looked older than she had ever seen him, worn down by the scandal and its implications for the family. "Very well," he said finally, "but only for a few months, until the gossip dies down and we can make other arrangements." Other arrangements. Another marriage contract, no doubt, though who would want her now was unclear. But Rosalind pushed that thought aside. For now, she had an escape, and she would take it. 3 days later, she arrived in Bath. The city rose before her in elegant crescents of honey-coloured stone, its architecture graceful and harmonious in a way that London's grandeur never achieved. The air felt different here, lighter somehow, less oppressive, or perhaps that was merely her imagination, her desperate hope for a fresh beginning. Aunt Agatha's house on the Royal Crescent was smaller than Ashford House, but infinitely more welcoming. Books lined every wall, paintings by contemporary artists hung in profusion, and the furniture, while elegant, had the comfortable, lived-in quality of pieces chosen for pleasure rather than display. Aunt Agatha herself was a revelation. At 53, she was still handsome, with silver-streaked dark hair worn in a simple style, intelligent grey eyes that missed nothing, and a direct manner that was both refreshing and slightly intimidating. "There you are," she said, embracing Rosalind warmly. "Let me look at you. Yes, I see it. The haunted look of a woman who has had her illusions shattered. Good. Illusions are dangerous things, my dear. Reality, however painful, is always preferable." Rosalind found herself smiling despite everything. "You are very direct, Aunt. Life is too short for anything else. Come, let me show you to your room, and then we shall have tea, and you will tell me everything. Not the sanitized version you would tell your father, but the truth. What you felt, what you feared, what you wanted but were afraid to admit." Over the following weeks, Rosalind discovered a world she had never known existed. Aunt Agatha's salon met twice weekly, and the conversations that took place there were unlike anything Rosalind had experienced in London's drawing rooms. Here, people debated ideas, philosophy, literature, politics, science. Women spoke as freely as men, their opinions valued and challenged in equal measure. At first, Rosalind merely observed, too uncertain of herself to contribute. But gradually, encouraged by her aunt, she began to participate. She discovered that she had opinions, thoughts that went beyond the acceptable topics of weather and fashion. She had always loved reading, but in London, her reading had been carefully curated. Novels deemed appropriate for young ladies, poetry that was sufficiently romantic but not too passionate. Here, Aunt Agatha's library offered everything from radical political treatises to scientific journals to novels that explored the depths of human emotion with unflinching honesty. "You have a mind, Rosalind," Aunt Agatha told her one evening as they sat together in the library. "A good one. It has been neglected, trained only in the skills necessary to catch and keep a husband. What a waste, what a terrible waste." "I was taught what I needed to know," Rosalind said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You were taught to be ornamental, useful perhaps in managing a household, but never encouraged to think deeply, to question, to explore ideas for their own sake. Your mother was the same. Brilliant woman, my sister, but she was broken by the constraints placed upon her. I watched it happen, and I was powerless to stop it." Rosalind looked up sharply. "My mother was unhappy? Desperately so, though she hid it well. She loved you, Rosalind, more than anything. But she had been forced into a marriage with your father, a good man, but not one who understood her, who could appreciate the depths of her mind and spirit. She withered in that marriage, like a plant denied sunlight. I vowed then that if I ever had the chance to save another woman from that fate, I would take it." The revelation shook Rosalind to her core. She had always assumed her parents' marriage was content, if not passionate. To learn that her mother had suffered in silence, had hidden her unhappiness behind the same mask of perfection Rosalind herself had worn, was both devastating and strangely liberating. "What should I have done?" Rosalind asked. "How could I have refused the marriage to Edmund? It would have ruined my family." "Perhaps," Aunt Agatha acknowledged. "But Pemberton did you a favor by ending it himself. Now you have a choice, Rosalind. You can return to London, allow your father to arrange another marriage, and repeat the pattern. Or you can choose differently. You can decide what you want from life and pursue it, regardless of what society expects. But what can I want? I have no fortune of my own, no skills beyond those of a lady. I'm entirely dependent on my father's goodwill." "Are you?" Aunt Agatha smiled mysteriously. "Your mother left you something, Rosalind. A small inheritance that was held in trust until you married or reached the age of 25. Given the circumstances, I believe we can petition to have it released to you now. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give you independence if you choose to claim it. The idea was dizzying. Independence, the ability to make her own choices, to live her own life. It was everything she had never dared to dream of. It was during her 6th week in Bath that Rosalind encountered Dr. James Thornfield again. She'd been walking through Sydney Gardens with her aunt when she saw him on the path ahead, deep in conversation with an older gentleman. He looked up, and their eyes met. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something else. Concern, perhaps, or curiosity. He excused himself from his companion and approached. "Lady Rosalind, I had not expected to see you in Bath." "Dr. Thornfield." She felt her cheeks warm, remembering their brief conversation on the balcony at the Haverford ball, mere minutes before her world had collapsed. "I am staying with my aunt for a time. May I introduce Lady Agatha Hartwell?" Rosalind said. "Aunt, this is Dr. James Thornfield. We met briefly in London." Aunt Agatha's eyes sparkled with interest. "Dr. Thornfield, I have heard of your work. You are the physician who has been advocating for improved sanitation in the poorer districts, are you not?" "I am, Lady Hartwell, though I fear my advocacy has made me somewhat unpopular with those who profit from the current arrangements." "Excellent," Aunt Agatha said with approval. "I have little use for people who prioritize profit over human welfare. You must come to my salon, Doctor. We meet on Tuesday and Friday evenings. I think you would find the company stimulating." "I would be honored, Lady Hartwell." His gaze returned to Rosalind, and she saw in his eyes a question he was too polite to ask. How was she? What had happened after that terrible night? She appreciated his discretion, even as part of her wanted to explain, to tell him that she was surviving, that she was beginning to discover who she might be beyond the role she had been trained to play. "I hope you will attend, Dr. Thornfield," she heard herself say. "My aunt's salon is quite unlike anything I have experienced before. The conversations are illuminating." "Then I shall certainly come," he replied, and the warmth in his smile made something flutter in her chest. Something she had never felt with Edmund, something that was both exciting and terrifying. As they parted ways, Aunt Agatha linked her arm through Rosalind's. "Now that," she said with satisfaction, "is a man of substance. Intelligent, principled, and, unless I am very much mistaken, quite taken with you." "Aunt," Rosalind protested, though she could not suppress a smile. "Oh, don't play the innocent with me, child. I saw the way he looked at you. And more importantly, I saw the way you looked at him. There was life in your eyes, Rosalind, interest, curiosity, all the things that were absent when you spoke of Pemberton." Rosalind fell silent, considering her aunt's words. It was true that Dr. Thornfield intrigued her in a way Edmund never had, but the thought of opening her heart again, of making herself vulnerable after such devastating betrayal, filled her with fear. "I am not ready," she said quietly. "No one is ever ready for the things that matter most," Aunt Agatha replied. "But that doesn't mean we should hide from them. You have been given a rare gift, Rosalind, the chance to begin again, to choose your own path. Don't waste it by allowing fear to rule you." That evening, as Rosalind prepared for bed, she stood at her window looking out over the lights of Bath. Somewhere in this city, Dr. Thornfield was going about his life, treating patients, advocating for change, living with purpose and passion. And for the first time since the Haverford ball, Rosalind allowed herself to wonder, what if she could have that too? What if she could be more than adequate, more than perfect? What if she could be herself, whoever that turned out to be? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but as she climbed into bed, she felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Fragile and tentative perhaps, but real nonetheless. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, it was hers to shape. Dr. James Thornfield became a regular attendee at Aunt Agatha's salon, and with each passing week, Rosalind found herself increasingly drawn to him. Unlike the men she had known in London, James, as he had asked her to call him in the informal atmosphere of the salon, spoke to her as an equal. He asked her opinions on matters of substance, listened thoughtfully to her responses, and challenged her thinking in ways that stimulated rather than diminished her. He was, she learned, the second son of a country gentleman of modest means. Having no inheritance to expect, he had pursued medicine, studying at Cambridge, and then in Edinburgh, where the medical school was considered the finest in Britain. He had returned to England with radical ideas about public health and a determination to serve not just the wealthy patients who could afford his fees, but the poor who suffered most from disease and neglect. "The conditions in the slums are unconscionable," he told the assembled salon one evening, his passion evident in every word. "Families living 10 to a room, no clean water, sewage running in the streets. And then society wonders why cholera and typhus spread so rapidly. We treat the symptoms while ignoring the causes. But surely the poor are responsible for their own circumstances," objected Mr. Whitmore, a retired banker who occasionally attended the salon. "If they would only apply themselves—" "Apply themselves?" James interrupted, his voice sharp. "A man working 16 hours a day in a factory for wages that barely feed his family. How is he to apply himself further? A woman trying to keep her children alive in a single room with no heat and no clean water. What more can she do? The system is designed to keep them in poverty, and then we blame them for failing to escape it." Rosalind watched him as he spoke, noting the fire in his eyes, the conviction in his bearing. This was a man who cared deeply about something beyond his own comfort and status. This was a man who saw the world's injustices and refused to accept them as inevitable. After the salon ended and the guests departed, James lingered, as he often did now. Aunt Agatha, with the tact of a woman who understood matters of the heart, excused herself, leaving Rosalind and James alone in the library. "I apologize if I was too vehement this evening," James said, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture Rosalind had come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. "I know such topics are not considered appropriate for polite company." "This is not polite company," Rosalind replied with a smile. "This is Aunt Agatha's salon, where all topics are fair ground for discussion, and I found your passion admirable, not offensive." He looked at her intently, and she felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. "You have changed since I first met you in London, Lady Rosalind. Or perhaps you have simply become more yourself." "I think the latter," she said thoughtfully. "In London I was playing a role. Here, with my aunt's guidance, I'm learning who I might be without that role." "And who is that?" The question was gentle, but it struck at the heart of what Rosalind had been grappling with for weeks. "I don't entirely know yet," she admitted, "but I am beginning to discover it. I know that I care about ideas, about learning, about understanding the world beyond the narrow confines I was raised in. I know that I want my life to have meaning beyond managing a household and producing heirs. I want more." "You deserve more," James said quietly. "You deserve everything." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. They stood there in the lamplight, the air between them charged with something unspoken but powerful. For a moment, Rosalind thought he might reach for her hand, might give voice to the feelings she sensed growing between them. But he stepped back, maintaining the proper distance. "It is late," he said. "I should take my leave. But I wonder, sir, there is to be a concert at the Assembly Rooms next week, a performance of Mozart. Would you and Lady Hartwell do me the honor of attending as my guests?" "We would be delighted," Rosalind replied, her heart racing. After he left, Aunt Agatha emerged from wherever she had been tactfully hiding. "That young man is in love with you," she announced without preamble. "Aunt," Rosalind protested, though she could not suppress her smile. "And unless I am very much mistaken, you are in love with him. Don't bother denying it. I see it in your face every time he enters a room." Rosalind sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed. "Is it love? How can I know? I thought I understood what I felt for Edmund, and I was entirely wrong." "What you felt for Edmund was duty dressed up as affection," Aunt Agatha said, sitting beside her. "What you feel for Dr. Thornfield is entirely different. You come alive in his presence. You challenge each other, inspire each other. That, my dear, is the beginning of real love. Oh, but even if that's true, what future could we have? He is a physician with no fortune, and I'm a disgraced woman with a modest inheritance. Society would— Society, Aunt Agatha interrupted firmly, has already judged you and found you wanting through no fault of your own. Why should you care what society thinks? You have the means to be independent. Dr. Thornfield has his profession. Together, you could build a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Is that not worth more than all of society's approval? The words resonated deep within Rosalind. Her aunt was right. She had already been judged and condemned by society. What more did she have to lose? And what might she gain if she had the courage to reach for it? The concert at the Assembly Rooms was a revelation. Rosalind had attended many musical performances in London, but she had never truly listened before, too conscious of being observed, of maintaining the proper demeanour. Here, with James seated beside her and Aunt Agatha on her other side, she allowed herself to be swept away by the music, to feel its emotional power without restraint. During the interval, as they stood in the crowded foyer, a voice cut through the pleasant hum of conversation like a knife. "Lady Rosalind Ashford, how unexpected to see you here." Rosalind turned, her blood running cold. Lady Pemberton stood before her, resplendent in purple silk, her expression a mixture of disdain and satisfaction. Beside her stood Edmund and Charlotte, now openly acknowledged as a couple. "Your Grace," Rosalind said, her voice steady despite the shock. Lord Pemberton, Charlotte. The crowd around them had fallen silent, sensing drama. Rosalind was acutely aware of James at her side, his presence a steadying force. "I had heard you had fled to Bath," Lady Pemberton continued, her voice carrying clearly. "How wise of you to remove yourself from London. The scandal has been quite persistent." "I am visiting my aunt," Rosalind replied with dignity. "Lady Agatha Hartwell. Perhaps you know her." Lady Pemberton's expression soured slightly. Aunt Agatha's reputation as an independent woman of means and influence was well known, and even the Duchess of Pemberton could not afford to openly insult her. Edmund stepped forward, and Rosalind noticed that he looked less confident than he had at the Haverford ball. "Lady Rosalind, I hope there are no hard feelings. Charlotte and I are to be married next month. We hope you can find it in your heart to wish us well." The audacity of the request nearly took Rosalind's breath away, but before she could respond, James spoke, his voice cool and measured. "I find it remarkable, Lord Pemberton, that you would ask Lady Rosalind for her blessing after humiliating her so publicly. It speaks either to extraordinary insensitivity or to a guilty conscience seeking absolution." "I suspect the latter." Edmund's face flushed. "And who, sir, are you to address me in such a manner?" "Dr. James Thornfield, and I address you as any man of conscience would address another who has behaved dishonourably." The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the confrontation. Rosalind saw the calculation in Edmund's eyes as he assessed James, his unfashionable but well-made clothes, his bearing that spoke of education but not aristocracy, his lack of title or obvious wealth. "A physician," Edmund said with barely concealed contempt. "How quaint. Tell me, Lady Rosalind, is this your new attachment? How far you have fallen from a future duchess to a doctor's— what? Companion? Charity case?" The words were designed to wound, and Rosalind felt their sting. But she also felt something else. Anger, not the helpless despair she had experienced at the Haverford ball, but a clean, clarifying rage. "Dr. Thornfield," she said clearly, "is a man of honour, intelligence, and genuine compassion. He dedicates his life to helping those who suffer, to improving the conditions of the most vulnerable in society. He is worth 10 of you, Edmund, and I count myself fortunate to know him." She turned to Charlotte, who had remained silent throughout, her pretty face troubled. "As for you, cousin, I hope you find happiness with Lord Pemberton. I truly do." But I suspect you will discover, as I nearly did, that a title and a fortune are poor substitutes for respect and genuine affection. Aunt Agatha, who had been watching the exchange with keen interest, now spoke. I believe the interval is ending. Come, Rosalind, Dr. Thornfield, let us return to our seats. The second half of the concert promises to be even more magnificent than the first. As they turned to leave, Edmund called out, You will regret this, Lady Rosalind. You are throwing away your last chance at respectability. Rosalind paused and looked back at him. No, Edmund, I am claiming my first chance at authenticity. There is a difference. They returned to their seats, and Rosalind was surprised to find that her hands were shaking, not with fear or humiliation, but with exhilaration. She had stood up to Edmund, had defended James, had spoken her truth without apology. It felt like shedding a skin she had worn for too long. James leaned close and whispered, That was magnificent. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. You were very brave. The second half of the concert passed in a blur. Rosalind was aware of the whispers around them, the curious glances, the speculation. The story of the confrontation would spread through Bath society by morning, but for once she found she didn't care. After the concert, as James escorted them home, he said, I fear I may have made things more difficult for you. My defense of you was perhaps too public, too vehement. Your defense of me was perfect, Rosalind replied. No one has ever stood up for me like that before. No one has ever seen me as worth defending. They had reached Aunt Agatha's door. The older woman, with her usual perception, announced that she was exhausted and would retire immediately, leaving Rosalind and James alone in the entrance hall. Rosalind, James said, and the use of her given name sent a thrill through her. I must speak plainly. I have tried to maintain proper distance to respect the conventions, but after tonight I find I cannot remain silent any longer. Her heart was pounding. Then speak. I love you. I've loved you since that night on the balcony at the Haverford ball, when I saw in your eyes a longing for something more than the life you had been given. I know I have little to offer. No title, no great fortune, only my profession and my devotion. But if you could find it in your heart to consider me, to imagine a life together built on mutual respect and genuine affection, I would count myself the most fortunate of men. Rosalind felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. James, But before she could finish, he continued, I do not ask for an answer now. I know you have been through a terrible ordeal, and I would not press you. But I wanted you to know my feelings, my intentions. I want to court you properly if you will allow it. I want to give you time to be certain of your own heart. I am certain, Rosalind said, her voice trembling with emotion. I love you, James. I think I have loved you since that night as well, though I did not recognize it then. You see me, truly see me, in a way no one else ever has. You value my mind, my opinions, my personhood. With you, I am not a role to be played or a prize to be won. I am simply myself, and that is enough. The joy that illuminated his face was like sunrise. Then I may court you, with the intention of marriage, when you are ready. Yes, she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, James, 1,000 times yes. He took her hands in his, and the touch sent warmth flooding through her. I will speak to your father, obtain his permission. My father will object, Rosalind said honestly. He will say you are beneath me, that I am throwing away my chances at a respectable match. Then we will wait, James said firmly. In 3 months you will be 25, and your mother's inheritance will be yours without restriction. We can marry then, if you still wish it, without your father's consent. I will wish it, Rosalind said with certainty. I will wish it every day until then, and every day after. They stood there in the lamplight, hands clasped, the future stretching before them full of possibility. It would not be easy. Society would judge them. Her father would be furious. There would be struggles and challenges ahead. But for the first time in her life, Rosalind was choosing her own path, claiming her own happiness, and it felt like freedom. The news of Rosalind's attachment to Dr. Thornfield spread through Bath society with predictable speed, and from Bath to London with even greater velocity. Within a fortnight, her father arrived at Aunt Agatha's door, his face thunderous with rage and disappointment. The confrontation took place in Aunt Agatha's drawing room, with the lady herself present as both witness and advocate. The Earl of Ashford paced before the fireplace like a caged lion, his fury barely contained. "A physician!" He spat the word as though it were an obscenity. "A man with no title, no estate, no connections of any significance. After everything I have done to secure your future, you would throw yourself away on such a man." "I am not throwing myself away, father," Rosalind replied, her voice calm despite the trembling in her hands. "I am choosing a life with a man I love and respect, a man who values me for who I am, not for what alliances I can bring." "Love," her father scoffed. "What does love matter when you will be living in genteel poverty, struggling to maintain even a modest household? You were raised for better than this, Rosalind. You were meant to be a duchess, to move in the higher circles of society." "I was meant to be miserable," Rosalind countered, finding strength in her conviction. "Edmund made that clear. I was adequate, father. Perfectly trained, perfectly behaved, and utterly inadequate to inspire any genuine feeling in the man I was contracted to marry. Is that truly the future you wanted for me?" The Earl's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but he pressed on. "Pemberton was a fool, but there are other matches to be made, other men of quality who would overlook the scandal if properly incentivized. I have already been in correspondence with Lord Hartley. He is a widower, in need of a wife to manage his household and care for his children. He would be willing—" "No." The word came out with such force that both her father and aunt looked at her in surprise. "I will not be bartered off to another man who sees me as a convenient solution to his domestic needs. I will not spend my life being adequate for someone else. I choose James, father. I choose a life of my own making." "You choose poverty and social obscurity," her father said bitterly. "You choose to disgrace this family further. If loving an honorable man and building a life of purpose is disgraceful, then I embrace the disgrace gladly." The Earl turned to his sister-in-law. "This is your doing, Agatha. You have filled her head with your radical notions, encouraged her to defy every principle of proper behavior." Aunt Agatha regarded him coolly. "I have encouraged her to think for herself, to value her own happiness and autonomy. If that is radical, then I am guilty as charged, but I will not apologize for helping my niece escape the fate that destroyed my sister." The Earl paled. "Your sister was perfectly content. My sister was desperately unhappy, and you know it," Aunt Agatha interrupted. "She withered in a marriage that gave her everything but the one thing that mattered, the freedom to be herself. I watched her fade year by year, watched the light go out of her eyes. I will not stand by and watch the same thing happen to Rosalind." A heavy silence fell over the room. The Earl seemed to age before their eyes, the fight draining out of him. When he spoke again, his voice was weary. "What would you have me do, Rosalind? Give my blessing to a match that will see you living on a physician's income, cut off from the society you were born into?" "I would have you trust that I know my own heart," Rosalind said gently. "I would have you believe that I am capable of choosing my own happiness, and I would have you know that I will always be your daughter, regardless of whom I marry." The Earl looked at her for a long moment, and she saw in his eyes a complex mixture of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also perhaps a reluctant respect. "You are very like your mother," he said finally, "more than I realized. She had that same stubborn conviction when she believed in something. Then you understand why I cannot compromise on this." He sighed heavily. "I do not give my blessing. I cannot. But neither will I stand in your way. When you turn 25 and your mother's inheritance becomes yours, you will be free to make your own choices. I pray you do not come to regret them. It was not the reconciliation Rosalind had hoped for, but it was more than she had expected. Thank you, Father. He departed that same afternoon, and Rosalind felt the weight of his disappointment like a physical burden. But beneath it was something else, a sense of liberation, of having claimed her own agency in a way she never had before. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Rosalind's life. James courted her with a devotion and attentiveness that made her previous engagement seem like a pale shadow. They walked together through Sydney Gardens, discussing everything from medical advances to literature to their hopes for the future. He introduced her to his work, taking her to visit some of his patients in the poorer districts of Bath, where she saw firsthand the conditions he fought to improve. She was shocked by what she witnessed. Families living in squalor, children suffering from preventable diseases, the grinding poverty that made every day a struggle for survival. But she was also inspired by James's dedication, his refusal to accept these conditions as inevitable. "I want to help," she told him after one such visit. "There must be something I can do." "Your compassion does you credit," James said, taking her hand, "and there is much you could do if you wished. Education, advocacy, fundraising for better sanitation and medical care, but I would never ask you to take on such work. It is difficult and often heartbreaking." "I'm not afraid of difficulty," Rosalind replied. "I have spent my entire life being ornamental, James. I want to be useful. I want my life to have meaning beyond my own comfort." The love in his eyes when he looked at her made her heart soar. "Then we shall do this work together, as partners in every sense." As her 25th birthday approached, preparations began for their wedding. It would be a small, quiet affair, nothing like the grand spectacle her marriage to Edmund would have been. They would marry in Bath, with Aunt Agatha and a few close friends in attendance. Her father had sent word that he would not attend, though he had arranged for her mother's inheritance to be transferred to her on her birthday as promised. The money was not a fortune, but it was enough to provide security. Combined with James's income from his medical practice, they would live comfortably, if not lavishly. They had found a modest but charming house near the centre of Bath, with room for James's consulting rooms on the ground floor and living quarters above. 1 week before the wedding, as Rosalind was reviewing the final arrangements with Aunt Agatha, a visitor was announced. To Rosalind's astonishment, it was Charlotte. Her cousin looked pale and drawn, her pretty face marked by lines of strain that had not been there months before. She stood in the doorway of the drawing room, twisting her hands nervously. "Rosalind, may I speak with you, privately?" Aunt Agatha looked to Rosalind, who nodded. "It's all right, Aunt. I will hear what she has to say." When they were alone, Charlotte sank into a chair as though her legs could no longer support her. "I have made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "The most terrible mistake of my life." Rosalind sat across from her, waiting. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction at Charlotte's obvious distress, but mostly she felt only pity. "Edmund is not the man I thought he was," Charlotte continued, "or perhaps he is exactly the man he always was, and I was too blinded by ambition to see it. He is cold, Rosalind, controlling. He dictates everything, what I wear, whom I see, how I spend my time. And he is cruel in small ways, always finding fault, always reminding me that I should be grateful he chose me, despite my inferior connections." "I am sorry," Rosalind said, and meant it. "Are you?" Charlotte looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "After what I did to you, you have every right to rejoice in my misery." "I do not rejoice in anyone's misery," Rosalind replied. "What you and Edmund did was wrong, and it hurt me deeply, but I have come to see it as a blessing in disguise. If you had not taken Edmund from me, I would never have found James. I would never have discovered who I truly am, what I truly want from life." "You seem happy," Charlotte said wistfully. "Truly happy, In a way I never saw you in London. Dr. Thornfield, he loves you, doesn't he? Really loves you. He does. And I love him." Charlotte's face crumpled. "I thought I loved Edmund. I thought his attention, his desire for me, was love. But it was only possession. He wanted me because I was willing to flatter him, to make him feel powerful and desired. Now that he has me, he treats me like a belonging, not a person." "Then leave him," Rosalind said. "The wedding has not yet taken place. You can still—" "I cannot," Charlotte interrupted. "The contracts are signed. My father has already spent the settlement money to pay his debts. If I break the engagement now, my family will be ruined. I am trapped, Rosalind, in a cage of my own making." Rosalind felt a surge of sympathy for her cousin, despite everything. "I wish I could help you, Charlotte, but I do not know how." "You cannot help me," Charlotte said, rising. "I came only to apologize and to warn you. Edmund is furious about your engagement to Dr. Thornfield. He sees it as a personal insult, as though you are rejecting him all over again by choosing happiness with another man. He has been saying terrible things about you in London, spreading rumors that you and Dr. Thornfield were involved before the breaking of your engagement, that your behavior was the real reason he ended the betrothal." Anger flared in Rosalind's chest. "That is a lie." "I know, but Edmund does not care about truth. He cares only about his pride, and you have wounded it. Be careful, Rosalind. He is vindictive, and he has powerful friends." After Charlotte left, Rosalind sat for a long time, processing what she had learned. She felt sorry for her cousin, trapped in a marriage that would bring only misery, but she also felt grateful that she had escaped that fate, grateful for the courage to choose differently. When James arrived that evening for dinner, she told him about Charlotte's visit and Edmund's rumor-mongering. His face darkened with anger. "I will not have your reputation further damaged by that man's lies," he said. "I will write to the papers, I will—" "No," Rosalind interrupted, taking his hands. "Let him say what he will. Those who know us will know the truth. Those who do not know us do not matter. I will not allow Edmund Pemberton to have any more power over my life or my happiness." James pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You are remarkable," he murmured. "The strongest, bravest woman I have ever known." "I am only learning to be brave," she replied. "You have taught me that." "No," he said, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "The courage was always in you, Rosalind. You simply needed the freedom to let it show." The night before her wedding, Rosalind stood at her window looking out over the lights of Bath. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. James Thornfield. She would leave behind the name Ashford, the expectations of her birth, the role she had been trained to play. She would step into a new life, one of her own choosing. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was right. Aunt Agatha knocked softly and entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I have something for you," she said. "Something your mother wanted you to have." She opened the box to reveal a delicate gold locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of Rosalind's mother as a young woman, her eyes bright with hope and possibility. "She gave this to me shortly before she died," Aunt Agatha said. "She made me promise to give it to you when you were ready to understand. She said, 'Tell Rosalind that I loved her father in my way.' But I wish I had been brave enough to choose differently, to claim my own happiness. Tell her to be braver than I was." Tears streamed down Rosalind's face as she clasped the locket. "I will be, Mamma," she whispered. "I promise." That night, she dreamed of her mother, young and radiant, smiling with approval. And when she woke on her wedding day, she felt her mother's presence like a blessing, a benediction on the choice she had made. She was ready to leave the past behind, ready to embrace the future, ready to bloom where she chose to plant herself. 8 months had passed since Rosalind became Mrs. James Thornfield, and the transformation in her life was so complete that sometimes she had to remind herself that the woman she had been in London, that perfectly groomed, carefully controlled creature, had truly existed at all. The house on Milsom Street had become both home and sanctuary. The ground floor served as James's consulting rooms, where a steady stream of patients arrived each day, some wealthy enough to pay his fees, others so poor they could offer only gratitude. James never turned anyone away, and Rosalind had learned to manage the household accounts with careful economy to ensure they could afford his generosity. But it was not a life of sacrifice or deprivation. It was a life of purpose, of meaning, of genuine partnership. Rosalind had discovered talents she never knew she possessed. She had a gift for organization and administration, and she had taken over the management of James's practice, creating systems for appointments, maintaining patient records, and even assisting with some of the simpler medical procedures. She had also begun working with a group of bath ladies, women like Aunt Agatha, independent thinkers who cared more about social reform than social standing, to establish a charitable clinic for the city's poorest residents. On this particular autumn morning, Rosalind stood in the small garden behind their house, harvesting herbs for the medicinal preparations James used in his practice. The air was crisp and golden, the leaves turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson. She wore a simple day dress of practical cotton, her hair pinned up loosely, her hands stained with earth. She had never felt more beautiful. "Mrs. Thornfield!" She turned to find their housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, hurrying toward her with unusual agitation. "There are visitors, ma'am, from London, a Lord and Lady Haverford. They say they must speak with you urgently." Rosalind's heart skipped. The Haverfords, in whose ballroom her engagement to Edmund had been so spectacularly destroyed. What could they possibly want with her now? She cleaned her hands and went inside, finding Lord and Lady Haverford waiting in the drawing-room. They were a handsome couple in their 40s, known for their influence in society and their generally progressive views. Lady Haverford rose immediately when Rosalind entered. "Mrs. Thornfield, forgive us for calling without notice, but we have come on a matter of some urgency." "Please sit," Rosalind said, her curiosity overcoming her apprehension. "How may I help you?" Lord Haverford leaned forward. "We have come to offer you an apology, first of all. The events that transpired at our ball were unconscionable, and we have felt the weight of our failure to intervene ever since." "You were not responsible for Lord Pemberton's actions," Rosalind said. "Perhaps not," Lady Haverford replied, "but we were responsible for the atmosphere that allowed such cruelty to be witnessed and gossiped about as entertainment. We should have acted more swiftly to protect you. We did not, and for that, we are deeply sorry." Rosalind was moved by their sincerity. "I appreciate your apology, though I assure you I have made my peace with what happened. Indeed, I have come to see it as a fortunate escape." "We have heard of your marriage to Dr. Thornfield," Lord Haverford said, "and of the work you are both doing here in Bath. It is most impressive, which brings us to the purpose of our visit." He exchanged a glance with his wife, who continued, "We're establishing a foundation in London, dedicated to improving medical care and living conditions for the poor. We have secured funding from several prominent families and the support of some of the most forward-thinking physicians in England. We would like Dr. Thornfield to serve as the Foundation's medical director, and we would like you, Mrs. Thornfield, to serve as its administrative director." Rosalind stared at them, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "You want us to move to London? To lead this foundation?" "We do," Lord Haverford confirmed. "We have been observing Dr. Thornfield's work for some time. His ideas about public health, his dedication to serving all patients regardless of their ability to pay. These are exactly the principles we wish to embody, and your organizational skills, your ability to manage complex operations, have not gone unnoticed. Together, you could transform the lives of thousands." "But the scandal," Rosalind protested. My presence in London would only invite gossip and undermine your foundation's credibility. Lady Haverford smiled. My dear Mrs. Thornfield, the scandal has already been superseded by a far greater one. Lord Pemberton's marriage to Miss Charlotte Ashford has proven to be spectacularly unhappy. There have been public arguments, rumours of his gambling debts and infidelities. Society's sympathy has shifted decidedly in your favour. You are now seen as the woman who had a fortunate escape, who chose love and purpose over empty prestige. Your story has become, in its way, rather inspiring. Rosalind felt dizzy with the implications. To return to London, not in shame, but in triumph. To do meaningful work on a scale far larger than what they could accomplish in Bath. To show everyone who had pitied or condemned her that she had not merely survived her disgrace, she had transcended it. I must discuss this with my husband, she said. This is not a decision I can make alone. Of course, Lord Haverford said, rising. We are staying at the York House Hotel. Please, take whatever time you need to consider our proposal. After they left, Rosalind sat in stunned silence until James returned from his morning rounds. She told him everything, watching his face as he processed the information. London, he said finally, leading a foundation that could change how medicine is practiced, how the poor are treated. It is everything I have dreamed of accomplishing. But, Rosalind prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, but I will not ask you to return to a place that holds such painful memories. I will not ask you to face the society that judged you so harshly. If you wish to remain here in Bath, where we have built a good life, I will decline the offer without regret. Rosalind's heart swelled with love for this man who always put her well-being first. James, do you remember what you told me the night we first declared our feelings? You said I deserved everything. I did not believe you then, but I believe you now. And what I deserve, what we both deserve, is the opportunity to do the greatest good we are capable of. You want to accept? I want to accept, she confirmed. I want to return to London not as Lady Rosalind Ashford, the disgraced almost Duchess, but as Mrs. James Thornfield, a woman who chose her own path and found her own purpose. I want to show them all that I did not merely survive, I flourished. James pulled her into his arms, and she felt his joy matching her own. Then we shall go to London together, as partners, as equals, and we shall change the world, one patient, one reform, one life at a time. The next months passed in a whirlwind of preparation. They travelled to London, met with the Foundation's board, and began the enormous task of establishing the organisation. They secured a building in a central location, hired staff, developed protocols and procedures. Rosalind discovered that she had a talent for fundraising, for persuading wealthy donors that their money could make a real difference. James assembled a team of physicians who shared his vision of medicine as a right, not a privilege. The Foundation's opening was attended by many of London's most influential figures. Rosalind stood beside James as he addressed the assembled crowd, speaking passionately about their mission and their hopes for the future. She saw familiar faces in the audience, some friendly, some merely curious, some still disapproving. But she held her head high, secure in the knowledge of who she was and what she had accomplished. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and examined the new facilities, Rosalind found herself face to face with Edmund and Charlotte. Edmund looked older, his handsome face marked by dissipation and discontent. Charlotte was pale and thin, her eyes haunted. Mrs. Thornfield, Edmund said, his tone stiff, I see you have landed on your feet. I have, Rosalind replied calmly. As have you, I understand. Congratulations on your marriage, Lord Pemberton. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or envy. You seem happy. I am. Very happy. I hope you can say the same. He could not, she saw. He could not claim happiness, could not pretend that his choice had brought him fulfillment. Charlotte stood silent beside him, a living ghost of the vivacious girl she had once been. I was wrong about you, Edmund said abruptly. I thought you were merely adequate, a well-trained wife who would fulfill her duties without complaint. I did not see your strength, your intelligence, your capacity for genuine passion. I see it now, and I see what I lost." "You did not lose me, Edmund," Rosalind said gently. "You never had me, not really. What you had was a role I was playing, a performance I had been trained to give. The woman I truly am, the woman standing before you now, would never have been happy with you, and you would never have been happy with her. We were both saved from a terrible mistake." She turned to Charlotte. "I hope you find your way to happiness, cousin. It is never too late to choose differently, to claim your own life." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Edmund took her arm and led her away, and Rosalind watched them go with pity, but no regret. "That was generous of you," James said, appearing at her side. "It was honest," Rosalind replied. "I meant what I said. I bear them no ill will. How can I, when their betrayal led me to you?" As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Rosalind and James stood together in the empty foundation building, looking at what they had created. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Giving up the life you were meant to have, the title, the position, the security of knowing exactly what was expected of you?" Rosalind thought of the woman she had been, that carefully controlled, perfectly adequate creature who had never questioned, never challenged, never truly lived. And she thought of the woman she had become, strong, purposeful, genuinely happy. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That life was a golden cage, James, beautiful but confining. You gave me the key to unlock it, or rather you showed me that I had always possessed the key. I only needed the courage to use it. And now I am exactly where I am meant to be. Not because someone else chose this path for me, but because I chose it for myself. I am blooming, James, finally, truly blooming, and I will never allow myself to be confined again." He kissed her then, there in the empty building that represented their shared dreams and shared purpose. And Rosalind felt a completeness, a rightness that she had never experienced in all her years of being perfect. She had been raised to be a duchess, to move in the highest circles of society, to fulfill a role determined before she could even speak. Instead, she had become something far more valuable, herself. A woman of purpose and passion, of strength and compassion. A woman who had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the beginning of her best life. The marriage contract had been an ironclad duty, binding her to a future she had never chosen. But a stolen kiss under the moonlight, or rather, the courage to choose love over obligation, authenticity over adequacy, had changed all the rules. And in breaking those rules, Rosalind had discovered the most important truth of all, that the only life worth living was one she chose for herself. That true freedom came not from following the path laid out by others, but from having the courage to forge her own way. She had bloomed where she was planted, but more importantly, she had learned to choose her own soil, her own sunlight, her own season for growth, and she would bloom forever. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more emotional tales, and leave a comment telling me which part of the story touched your heart the most. I love hearing from you, and your support means everything. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to choose your own happiness.